Hello, team. Welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War news updates, second part thereof, the 17th of August 2024. Just hanging on tenuously to the last vestiges of the 17th of August. And I'm going to I'll squeeze one out before I go to bed, so to speak. I am going to do a military aid video. And we'll start with the good old UK Storm Shadow shenanigans. The Times reports that Britain urges allies to allow Ukrainians to use Storm Shadows in striking on Russia. British ministers are holding private talks with Western governments who have so far been cautious about providing Ukraine with long-range weapons for fear of escalating the conflict. And the reality of the situation is that it is indeed the US that are holding back the usage of these weapons. The UK does not allow Ukraine to use Storm Shadow missiles inside Russia, says Null reports, because the US does not approve. The UK requested US approval a month ago, but has not yet received a response. Additionally, approval is needed from France and another country. So one would assume France and Germany, maybe France and Italy, probably France and Italy, actually, with regard to the Storm Shadow. And this is what we'd heard previously. It's just rumbling on. But I think my understanding is it's the US that are really holding back the use of these missiles because they have overly cautious restrictions placed upon Ukraine. And Ukraine is really adhering to those restrictions, not using allied weaponry inside Russia, just because the US has told them not to and threatened them, it appears, with not giving further aid packages if they do indeed do so. So that's rumbling on, but it seems to be much more accepted now that the US are one of the main variables that have contributed to the inability for Ukraine to use those missiles. Now, Germany is temporarily freezing military aid to Ukraine to save costs, according to FAS. Now, this has caused an awful lot of uproar within Ukraine today. Chancellor Scholz and Finance Minister Lindner have halted all new funding requests, though existing contracts will be fulfilled. Germany is also working on redirecting funds from frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine. And German aid to Ukraine has taken this very badly. He says, let me put it very clearly, providing military assistance to Ukraine, which is necessary to ensure Ukraine's victory, is in our own interests. And anyone who hasn't understood that after 2.5 years of daily Russian terror is beyond my ability to help. What happened to as long as it takes? What happened to second biggest supporter of Ukraine? I feel so incredibly shamed right now. If we fail to provide military support for Ukraine now, which incidentally accounts for just around 1.46% of the total budget of 2024, it will cost us much more in a not too distant future. So we have this new crisis developing with Germany threatening to freeze funding. Now, the official line coming out from Kyiv is somewhat different, and I wonder whether this is trying to manage the situation, trying to manage narratives here and spin this, or whether it is genuinely the case that what Ukraine is saying. What do they say? Kyiv Independent reports Ukraine's foreign ministry says reports on Germany halting military aid are, quote, manipulation. Ukraine's foreign ministry said on August the 17th that reports on Germany allegedly halting new military aid for Ukraine were a manipulation. Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, FAZ, reported earlier on the same day that Germany's finance ministry was not planning to approve additional aid to Ukraine as part of budgetary savings this year. And Euromaidan Press reports that Ukraine dismisses reports of Germany halting military aid as manipulative. A foreign ministry spokesman said the actual level of support for Ukraine in the coming year will be determined after the German budget is approved in November, which is, I don't know, possibly more aligned with what German aid to Ukraine had said previously, that when you'd heard that they were going to cut aid in half for the next year, that was in line with what they did the previous year, and then they add bits on and bits on and bits on, so that actually it ends up being double what it initially started as. This could be an element of that, or it could just be really bad news for Ukraine, or manipulation, like Ukraine say. But I guess we'll have to wait to find out how the dust settles on that one. It could be a real threat to Ukraine, since they if they're not relying on the US, then they are relying on Germany as the second biggest contributor of military equipment to Ukraine. Now, Colby Badwar here says, I remain deeply skeptical that an additional supplemental will pass this year. What's he talking about? Well, the US, there are rumors that there might be another attempt at a supplemental, like the $60 billion package that we saw that was delayed for 7 months. Could be another one of those. He says if it's going to have any chance, Biden needs to drop all remaining restrictions on Ukraine, having and drastically increase the size of drawdowns that they are receiving. So Doug Klain says, a scoop here in Politico, that Senator Blumenthal and who's this? Senator Lindsey Graham, told Zelensky that they'll push for another Ukraine supplemental this year, as well as to lift US weapons restrictions on Ukrainian strikes into Russia. Now, pushing for an appropriations bill and getting one are two very separate things. But it would be great at least to get a lot of pressure on the US administration to change their restrictions that they currently have imposed on Ukraine. Now, damage control, Colby Badwar again. Multiple US officials tell CNN they aren't concerned about escalation. They just want Ukraine to focus on Crimea because they have a limited number of ATACMS. Interesting, if true, that they want, the idea here is that the US, look, we don't want you to not do this and not do that because of escalation. We're not afraid of escalation. What we are afraid of is you guys using up all their ATACMS and there aren't enough left. But Badawar says, how stupid do they think we are? 1,200 expired missiles in inventory, 500 new ones coming off the production line. There are more than enough. The administration, including the president himself, has said countless times on the record that they are concerned about escalation. Do they really think that we're going to buy this? So his idea would be that all accusations of phobia of escalation that have been leveled at the US administration are indeed, accurate. Now, Fabian Hoffman talks about missiles here, and we've heard a lot about the potential for the JASMs to find their way to Ukraine. And he does a thread on them, so let's go into that. With the AGM-158A JASM now emerging as a viable option for Ukraine, it's a good opportunity to explore the basic capability profile and main advantages of JASM compared to ATACMS, Storm Shadow or Scout PG, and Taurus. The AGM-158A JASM is, broadly speaking, the American counterpart to the German-Swedish Taurus, KEPD 350, and a British-French Storm Shadow or Scalp EG. Due to its significant export success, it's increasingly becoming the standard land attack cruise missile in Western arsenals. The AGM-158A JASM entered service in 2003. It has an unclassified range of 370 kilometers and carries a 450 kilogram, 1,000-pound penetrator warhead. JASM stands for its low observability fuselage, providing a smaller radar cross-section than other cruise missiles in its class. The WDU-42B penetrator warhead inside the JASM is relatively similar in shape and function to the penetrator warheads found inside the Taurus and Storm Shadow Scalp PG. However, JASM's payload differs by not including a precursor-shaped charge. This somewhat limits the effectiveness against heavily hardened targets, especially compared to Taurus, which also has the most shape-optimized penetrator in NATO arsenals. However, there are likely no Russian targets in Ukraine where this would be relevant. So the thing about the Taurus, for example, they have these broach warheads that are two-stage warheads that kind of explode so that a further penetration can take place to then explode secondarily. What that means is that if you're trying to hit a bunker, you don't want the whole missile to explode on the outside of the bunker. You want to be blowing up the stuff inside the bunker or command post, whatever it is, some reinforced structural compound. What you want to do is blast a hole through the fortification, if you like, through the building, and then explode secondarily and destroy the actual target. And these can be useful against things like bridges, where it can blast through the top of the bridge, and then the secondary explosion hit the pylon, hit the structure beneath that. One of the, I guess, what is it? Not pylon, but the bridge legs or whatever you call them. Words fail me right now. Anyway, uh, as Fabian Hoffman continues, however, there are likely no Russian targets in Ukraine where this would be relevant. Besides the baseline AGM-158A JASM, other variants have been developed, most notably the AGM-158B JASM-ER extended range. The JASM-ER more than doubles the unclassified range of the baseline variant to 1,000 kilometers. However, it's highly unlikely that Ukraine would receive the JASM-ER. This is because of the critical importance of the JASM-ER would play in a US-China warfighting scenario. Given the expected effectiveness of China's air and missile defense, JASM-ER's range advantage is needed to credibly threaten Chinese targets located at strategic depth. Due to the limited range and utility of the baseline variant in a conflict with China, officials may be more willing to part with the inventory of AGM-158A JASMs. Additionally, early production JASM AURs are nearing their expiration dates, further justifying delivery. Assuming my accounting is accurate, the US Air Force acquired just over 2,000 AGM-158A JASMs between 2003 and 2021. The final production lot for the AGM-158A JASMs was awarded in financial year 2016. While some JASMs have been used, a substantial stockpile should be available. If Ukraine receives the AGM-158A JASM, it will be the first time the AFU has access to two types of Western long-range strike weapons in substantial numbers. Keep in mind that ATACMS deliveries began when Ukraine's Storm Shadow Scalp-EG arsenal was virtually exhausted. Being able to strike critical targets from ballistic, ATACMS, and ground-skimming JASM attack vectors will significantly complicate Russian missile defense efforts and facilitate Ukrainian efforts at overwhelming Russian integrated air and missile systems. This is important because current ATACMS usage is high, although this may not be unsustainable in the short term. Relying on salvo attacks to penetrate Russian missile defense reduces the efficiency of Ukrainian long-range strikes using ATACMS. JASM can help with that. So at the moment, they are losing quite a few ATACMS by trying to overwhelm Russian defenses and therefore send a load more ATACMS than they would otherwise deemed necessary for those targets. He continues, Hoffman, it will force Russia to position missile systems, defense systems, for air-breathing, low-flying threats alongside those for high-altitude ballistic missile threats. In any case, if JASM is delivered, I expect to see an increase in reported S-300 and S-400 attrition events. JASM would, of course, be useful to take out a range of operational level targets inside Ukraine, such as supply depots and logistical facilities. The expected utility of JASM would strongly increase if Ukraine were permitted to use them within Russia, considering the demonstrated challenges the Russians faced in countering Storm Shadow and Scalp-EG, and the highly survivable design of JASM. I anticipate high initial effectiveness. But in part, this will also depend on the extent of Ukraine's access to US targeting data. Receiving the AGM-158A JASM would enhance Ukraine's long-range strike capabilities. As for Germany, I don't anticipate delivery of JASMs to influence their stance on delivering Taurus. As long as the current government remains in power, Taurus will remain in Germany. So there have been some theories that the Germans are waiting for the Americans to release a cruise missile so that to Ukraine, so that Germany could be given implicitly given permission to send their own tourists. But Fabian Hoffman thinks that's unlikely. Now, Ukrainian companies account for 80% of army supply contracts, according to the Defense Ministry. Contracts with Ukrainian manufacturers have reportedly increased since the Defense Ministry established a state logistical operator, DOT, in December 2023. So this is really good for the Ukrainians. If they can produce stuff in their own country, then it has a twofold benefit. One, it means that they can produce weapons themselves, such as a cruise missile. If they can produce cruise missiles and ballistic missiles and whatnot, say the Neptune missile, in Ukraine, then there will be no restrictions on using them, say, inside Russia. So that's one benefit. The other benefit is that, of course, tax and employment and finances are, certainly much more beneficial that the Ukrainians have a robust arms industry themselves for all those kind of reasons. Right. Zelensky himself has showcased Ukrainian-made weapons. So the president shared a video showing the Neptune missile. Let's just play this. The Neptune missile, Sea Baby and Magura V5 maritime drones, and the Bogdana SPG self-propelled gun, the Stugna. That's the very effective ATGM, anti-tank guided missile, the Stugna, and Corsair anti-tank missiles, and aerial drones such as the Boba, the Morok, and Lyuti. So they are obviously pretty happy with all these developments. The Neptune there is the one that lots of people are talking about, with him showing that and seeming to show the Neptune missile for the first time in detail. Let's go back to, it'll be back there somewhere. Point is that you don't often see the Neptune so explicitly mentioned. It is one that there are quite a few hopes pinned on. I pin quite a few hopes on the Neptune because it's of its supposed range, over 1,000 kilometers now, and if they can make it, I guess, a little bit more resilient to electronic warfare and jamming, then that could be a really useful piece of ordnance. There are claims, however, that they can only make sort of 1 or 2 a month at the moment. Anyway, Euromaidan Press talks about Sweden considering sending military advisors to Ukraine. Starting in the autumn of 2024, Sweden may deploy personnel to Ukraine to support defense procurement, maintain donated equipment, and gather insights into its battlefield performance. That would be good. It would be great if a nation like Sweden do that, because I think it's far less likely that Russia would kick off so much if it was Sweden as opposed to the US, UK, or France. I talked about this previously, saying that I think the Baltic states would be good suggestions for sending these support troops into Ukraine. And then staying on Sweden, Euromaidan Press says, we are taking measures so that Ukraine can gain access to newly produced defense equipment, says Defense Minister Paul Jonsson of Sweden. So Sweden wants to move from direct transfer to arms production in Ukraine. They're another country that wants their arms manufacturers to follow suit, to follow what, say, Rheinmetall and BAE Systems and others have done, Northrop Grumman in Ukraine, in producing or working cooperatively with Ukraine to produce weaponry, so that, well, it's much better if it gets built in Ukraine and then it can be maintained in Ukraine, and it's just much closer, as well as having those benefits I talked about earlier. Now, Andrew Perpetua says Russian units are confirming that they are using FPV drones on fiber optic cables. They have been confirmed in Kherson and Kursk so far, and claimed in other regions, thus greatly diminishing the value of electronic warfare. Ukraine also has solutions for eliminating the value of electronic warfare, although they are more sophisticated. Now, these are ways of getting round, as mentioned, electronic warfare. You cannot really interrupt the communication if it's going along an actual wire rather than through the air, where those frequencies can be messed with, so on and so forth. If you actually have a tangible connection from the drone to the operator, then you've got a communication line that, I was going to say, can't be severed. But of course, the challenge is it can be severed because it can be cut or it can get tangled. So it's useful, it's a way around a problem, and it could well be effective, but you need quite a few kilometers of wire cable, and also you can't fly near trees particularly, or in bushes, or some of the incredibly effective drone control that we've seen would just be much more challenging when you've got a line that's following on behind that cannot get caught on any obstacles out there in the landscape. Okay, finally, I'm going to go to this thread, or this claim. Russia has found another source to replenish its army, says this source, Bossad Tiger, Burza Tiger fella. Labour centres in the Russian Federation began to technically lead unemployed people to war. Russian pro-war propaganda explains how it works. The unemployed were initially offered contract service in the Russian army as a vacancy. After 2 refusals of such employment, the state decides to abolish unemployment benefits. It's this kind of crypto and klepto mobilization that we have seen over time. We've seen convicts rounded up. We've seen refuseniks rounded up recently. And now we're seeing the unemployed be attracted towards signing up. And then if the attraction doesn't work, then cajoled. The carrot followed swiftly by the stick. Any way to get soldiers on the front lines, boots on the ground for the Russians, they are taking it. Anyway, that's enough from me babbling on. Thank you so much for listening. Take care and speak to you soon.